are these people?
Oh, CIA in Ukraine, Colin. Who would have thunk? Um, I know we all know that this was happening, but we're gonna go into a bit of why that it might be new news. So, antiwar.com's Dave DeCamp, friend of the show, CIA built 12 spy bases in Ukraine near the Russian border over the past decade. A report from the New York Times sheds more light on the CIA's involvement in Ukraine since the 2014 coup. So, the CIA helped build 12 secret spy bases in Ukraine along the Russian border as part of the agency's support for Ukrainian intelligence that started in 2014, the New York Times reported on Sunday. The report described one of the CIA-built spy bases as an underground bunker used by Ukrainian soldiers to, quote, track Russian spy satellites and eavesdrop on conversations between Russian commanders. The Times report sheds new light on the CIA's involvement in Ukraine, which played a major role in provoking the Russian invasion. A European official told the paper that when Russian President Vladimir Putin was considering invading Ukraine towards the end of 2021, the head of one of Russia's main spy services told him that the CIA and Britain's MI6 were controlling Ukraine and turning it into a backhead for operations against Moscow. So this is in 21, Care Bear. So,
Yeah.
Friend of the show, Fiorella, admission the CIA worked with Ukraine for a decade gathering intel against Russia. The New York Times dropped what many are calling a, quote, bombshell report, but is what many of us have stated for years. The CIA provided intel for targeted missile strikes, tracking of Russian troops, and support for spy networks. But why did they admit to this now? The New York Times, which has been caught lying about Gaza and hiring compromised journalists. So, Brad Pierce, the New York Times, of course, is the arbiter of acceptable discourse. It is no longer a, quote, conspiracy theory that the CIA was, again, using Ukraine against Russia for years. They heavily framed this, uncritically trusting U.S. Ukrainian spooks and acting like it is all noble. Feet. In 200-plus interviews, current and former officials in Ukraine, the U.S., and Europe described this as a partnership that was initially built from mutual distrust before expanding, turning Ukraine into an intelligence-gathering hub that intercepted more Russian communications from the CIA station in Kyiv could initially handle. But here's the catch. According to the article, U.S., the CIA had, quote, red lines that Ukraine ended up breaking. The new partnership started producing so much raw intelligence about Russia that it had to be shipped to Langley for processing, but the CIA did have red lines. It wouldn't help the Ukrainians conduct offensive lethal operations. It was a distinction that grated on the Ukrainians. Because the US and NATO have never admitted they're fully fighting Russia, the idea of adding a proxy is being hands-off in practice, thereby providing info and doing everything against said enemy, but never pulling the trigger. This coincides with their interventions elsewhere via proxy. Moderate rebels in Syria, opposition forces in Venezuela, Al-Qaeda factions in Iraq, opposition in Libya, Contras in Nicaragua and El Salvador, etc. The list goes on, but the reality is they are in control. They may not pull the trigger, but it is their weapons, funding, and aid the radical factions use. It is their mastermind. So, back to this Dave article. The report said the CIA's relationship with Ukrainian intelligence could be traced back to February 24th, 2014, right under former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych was ousted in a U.S.-backed coup. On that day, Valentin Nalvyenchenko, the new head of the security service of Ukraine, called the CIA and asked for help in rebuilding Ukraine's intelligence capabilities. The CIA agreed to help as it saw an opportunity to collect more intelligence on Russia. The U.S. spy agency helped form the 5th directorate in the SBU, which consisted of young Ukrainians who were born after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The idea was to assuage CIA concerns about the Ukrainian spy agency being full of older, more Russian-sympathetic Ukrainians. Isn't that funny? They wanted the young ones who didn't know about that nice Soviet Union help.
Yeah.
The Washington Post first reported on the CIA's creation of the Fifth Directorate back in October 2023. The Post report said the CIA had spent tens of millions of dollars to transform Ukraine's Soviet-formed services into potent allies against Moscow. The CIA has also supported Ukraine's military intelligence agency known as the GUR. The GUR provided an opportunity for the U.S. since it was allowed to collect intelligence outside of Ukraine, meaning it could be used inside Russia. A former U.S. intelligence official speaking to the Post described the GUR as our little baby. Ooh, it's a cute little baby. So, see, again, clearly this shows that one, either the U.S. is distancing itself from their role in terrorist attacks by Ukraine by washing their hands of incidents and admitting, vis-a-vis a limited hangout, what their role allegedly was, or that they really couldn't control Ukraine as much as they would have liked. I tend to think the article is actually whitewashing the CIA's involvement because we know Ukraine is a NATO proxy who wouldn't be capable, as admitting in this article, defend anything without the U.S., NATO, and their intelligence network's aid. I find it hard to believe they couldn't control these factions if they wanted to. Back to Dave, the Times report said the CIA started training Ukrainian spies who have operated inside Russia, across Europe, in Cuba, and other places where the Russians have a large presence. The CIA also helped create an elite commando unit known as Unit 2245, which collected Russian drones and other tech so the U.S. could reverse engineer them. One member of Unit 2245 was Krylo Budanov, who now heads the GUR. Ukrainian intelligence services began assassinating separatist leaders in the Donbass in 2016 and has been credited with several killings inside Russia, including the car bombing that killed Daria Dugina, daughter of the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin. U.S. officials insist the CIA isn't involved in the assassinations, but the killings have not impacted the CIA's support. Fee, one more time, another vital point here. This took place for at least a decade and under three very different U.S. presidents, but before then, there was already U.S. presence. This shows again what many American journalists and analysts try to tell Russia. It does not matter which president you have, the same type of foreign policy rooted in regime change, wars, or proxy wars continue. Beginning with Obama, then continuing with Trump, who put anti-Russian hawks in key positions, including Pompeo as CIA director and John Bolton as national security advisor, and they stayed on the payroll for the next president. So they visited Kyiv to give full support for the secret partnership, which expanded to include more specialized training programs and the building of additional secret bases. So all this is leading to this, Care Bear. So a friend of the show, Nico House, with his stuff over at Hotspot, is going to tell you what all this foreign interference might lead to. So, rolling the footage.
Some NATO countries are preparing to send their own troops to Ukraine. According to Slavic Prime Minister Robert Fico, not only are there some NATO states preparing to send troops, but even some European Union states that are planning to send troops to Ukraine on a bilateral basis. Now, Fico said this in a televised meeting ahead of a meeting with several European leaders. And it's important to note that he probably has some authority on this issue because Slovakia is a NATO state, even though Fico himself has actually opposed Ukrainian military intervention by way of NATO and the European Union. I just don't understand why this is even being discussed or considered. So if Russia just started a whole war with Ukraine because they wanted to make it clear that they have a problem with the potential for Ukraine to violate the Minsk agreement and join NATO, why would you then use a bunch of NATO countries to send their military to piss Russia off even further? Now, when you couple that with the fact that the U.S. military has been saber rattling, saying that they're preparing right now actively to go to war with China, it makes you wonder, are they going to Ukraine to assist Ukraine or to set up shop? Because everybody knows the only reason the United States is involved with Ukraine is so that Ukraine can be a friendly country in case the United States and NATO powers had to set up shop in order to go to war with whom? Russia. And now, quite frankly, Ukraine is in such shitty condition that they really have no place to refuse any base that NATO would choose to set up in Ukraine. And they can't really hide behind the fear of war because they're already actively engaged in a war, implying that both sides actually stood a chance of winning, but whatever. So is this really about sending military assistance to help with the war against Russia? Or is it actually about this larger development that we're seeing unfold, where it seems that the NATO and Western powers are preparing for a world war, and Russia and China are their first targets? And the reason that we've seen the United States put so much effort into propping up not only Ukraine, but Taiwan is so that they can have established bases in case they decide to launch a ground assault from those respective areas against China and Russia. It makes you think. It doesn't look good.
Well, thoughts, Care Bear?
I think we need to put tale as old as time.
Yep. Yep. And this is also what's happening in Israel too right now, right? This is all to spark something. So, you know, if we want to go, if we want to put our tinfoil hats on, there's a WEF that wants a whole reset, a big, great one. So what do you think? What do you think hits the reset switch, Collin? You know? So
in terms of,
yes, of a reset of the entire planet, a great one. What do you think would do that?
Oh,
yeah, a few of those, just a couple of those. You know, just it's a big red button. Boop.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. Nuclear world war. So, you know, fun times, good times. You know, we're moving on up. So,
yes.
Yep.
Yes.
But no,
I mean, I have not much more to say. It's just kind of like, of course, we have our hands everywhere, and like with business, like just to kind of piss off Russia to, I think, just tempting them, start shit, you know, like, I don't know. It just feels so like work for me.
Yeah.
No, not even. I'll take that back because my students act better than like a lot of these fools. So,
well, just
like,
to close
my
this out,
students have more restraint.
Just to close this out, Fee here. Of course, in this article, you have other accusations still. The Russiagate scandal, blaming Russia for Clinton's loss, as well as other unproven allegations, because they can't help themselves. But again, it seems we've seen a shift here with fatigue from the Ukraine war. The U.S. Congress is having difficulty passing more legislation for funding in the House of Representatives, while more and more Americans are protesting this aid due to an increase in economic and domestic woes, adding to, of course, now new money going to Israel. So I go back to the question we all have to ask ourselves is, why is the U.S. allowing the New York Times, an outlet found to have massive influence from the State Department and CIA, to publish a piece that's not great publicity? Again, it seems they're distancing themselves and via the article washing their and the CIA's hands of full culpability for what is yet another failed proxy war. As we know, Russia's been making progress, not just with Avdiivka, which was a major victory and blow to NATO, but also because of the gains Russia is making geopolitically, surpassing sanctions. And with BRICS, here yet again is an admission that either points to the U.S. slowly backing away from Ukraine, or perhaps something like a distraction. Be an admission that is loud so as the public doesn't feel like they're being lied to, as few are currently trustful of mainstream media. People should not allow themselves to be hoodwinked, though. This isn't the New York Times doing journalism, it's them doing PR and disaster narrative management, as the U.S. entire narrative keeps sinking with holes. Don't for a second think this is limited hangout is giving you all the information without a purpose. So,
Right.
Yep. But, you know, let us know what you think. Leave a comment down the doobly-doo. You know, hit that subscribe button. Hit like, too. Why not? those buttons are right next to each other, I think, right? But we're getting there. We're getting to 2K. So we're like 1.8, right? Something like that. 1.82.
Yeah, 1.8.
So
3.